Romance is in the air for Valentine's Day. And when you're ready to pop the question, all you need is the perfect moment to come around. And, of course, the ring. At BlueNile.com, you can find thousands of natural and lab-grown diamonds, plus legendary service from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who can answer every question, help you design a custom ring, and even plan the proposal. So seize the day today. Right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
After more than 470 days, Israel began seeing some of the hostages taken on October 7th return to them. The hostages continue to be released, and the Israeli people are now trying to make sense of this deal. Hello, and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name is Brian Lilly, your host. On the one hand, everyone wanted the hostages to come home, whether they were dead or alive. The question has always been, at what price? The deal that was struck has been controversial, you might say. It was the deal that no one wanted, for the result that everyone wanted. Also came about in a very strange way. Most of it was negotiated with the Biden administration and Israel on one side, Qatar and Egypt on the other side, acting on behalf of Hamas. But it only really came together after the Trump administration sent their point man, Steve Witkoff, into the talks before Donald Trump was even sworn in. To talk about all of this and how it's playing out in Israel, I reached out to Vivian Bercovici, a lawyer, a writer. You may have read her in the National Post or heard her own podcast, State of Tel Aviv. She's a Canadian who now spends most of her time in Israel and from 2014 until 2016 served as Canada's ambassador to Israel, all of which gives her unique insights. Vivian, would I be wrong in describing this as the deal nobody wanted, but the result everyone demanded, in the sense that you're getting hostages back, but at a terrible price?
Yeah, I think it's a terrible deal. It's a horrible deal. So it's the deal, as you say, that nobody wants, but that I believe we need desperately, that Israel needs desperately. You know, I was speaking with someone, Yossi Klein Halevi, who's a really fantastic writer and kind of interpreter of society here, a couple of weeks ago, and he said, you know, we lost the war of October 7th, with which I agree. But we've almost won the war of October 8th. But we can't win October 8th until we go back and finish up October 7th. And that was the day, of course, of the horrible massacre, torture, murders, taking of hostages. And this country needs to get them back.
That was the big debate when I was in Israel with you a year ago, January 2024. People saying, well, how big of a price? Do we bring back the hostages at any price? And in some ways, it seems like the answer is yes. Now, it's a year later. People are more desperate. The elation, though, among the families, what is the mood been like with the general public as the hostages come back? And we'll separate out those two things. The mood at seeing people reunited with their families versus the politics of it.
As you know, it's very hard to kind of untangle those two things in this crazy country, but I'll do my best. First of all, the debate that was going on when you were here a year ago has never ceased, right? It's just been constant. It mutates. It takes on different shape and urgency. And the issue of price is a very, very profound issue. The reaction of people is so interesting. Before the first hostages came out, it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow, there were 3 young women, civilian women, released. And there was a very strong contingent of Israeli society that was absolutely against the deal. At any cost, they felt
they wanted to defeat Hamas, worry about hostages later.
Well, I mean, I think there were a number of things. You know, they weren't a monolith, that camp, but I would say that a significant contingent had bought into this total victory, defeat Hamas. Okay, not sure what the total victory thing means, but my response to that would be it's absolutely not achievable until we bring home the hostages. And there are many reasons for that. So there's this one demographic that is like, no, we must not. We must pulverize Hamas, which is probably a longer term goal than 1 year. And I don't think many Israelis would disagree. I mean, nobody wants ISIS living on their doorstep and in their bedrooms, literally. And that's what we have. But there were also people who felt we can't release these terrorist murderers. I mean, these are some of the most vicious, violent terrorists of the last 20, 30 years. Horrific crimes.
It's why it's been so frustrating for me watching so much Western media, including here in Canada, and it's the usual suspects, describe it as a hostage exchange.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. These people are not hostages. They were in prison for very good reasons.
And there's also understand that this so-called deal does not include the elite Nakba Hamas soldiers who invaded Israel on October 7th. And most of the people who have been arrested or detained since October 7th. This is all for, the guys, and most of the guys. I don't think any women are on multiple life sentences. This includes the guys who blow up buses, blow up pizza parlors on school holidays when they're full of families. They are Islamist extremists. They believe that Israel should be annihilated and that every Jew, not just in Israel, but anywhere in the world, should be killed. And so, but the cohort that was saying, we can't give in, we can't exchange these murderers for civilians, and, about 95% of the hostages still in detention, or still in captivity, in the Gaza Strip are civilians. And there may be one or two actual soldiers, male soldiers. But in their mind, they consider any male under the age of 50, whether he's in the army or not, to be a soldier. Clearly, based on who they released yesterday, they also seem to consider 80-year-olds to be soldiers. So, no, there's no comparison. You're absolutely right. There's no comparison. It's a disgusting.
It's understandable why there'd be opposition, though, to the deal based on who's getting released. But what about those who are being reunited with their loved ones? One of the kibbutzes that you took me to, Kfar Asa, when I posted an image of that kibbutz on the day that the hostages were being released, I said, remember, this is what these people did. Someone got back to me immediately on X and said, two of the women released today lived on that street. They didn't say they lived in that kibbutz. I posted a photo of the youth area on the kibbutz.
Young generation neighborhood.
Yeah, the young generation neighborhood. And so those two women have been reunited with their families. The joy that you see watching the video is immense. Has that changed any sympathies, any view of the deal since those images came out?
Yes, absolutely. And interestingly, I just had coffee this morning with someone who I met by chance, who is doing reserve service in the Army, a lot of it, and initially was very strongly opposed to the deal. And the images have kind of rekindled, helped people, I think, in Israel reconnect with how urgent and critical this mission is. This is who we are morally. If we do not go to the ends of the earth to bring home civilians who have been captured so brutally, to bring home soldiers who have been captured so brutally and detained so inhumanely, who's going to send their children to fight? The grounding ethos of this country is leave no one behind. And it's more than just a saying. We really leave no one behind. So many soldiers who fell in Gaza died because they were trying to rescue their injured colleagues, and they walked into booby traps and ambushes because it's just not done. And that is such important glue for this society.
A friend just got back from a trip to Israel. Our mutual friend Larry took another group, and they went and met with the, he said they were called tunnel weasels. These are the guys that go into the tunnels. And
I have a friend whose son is in that unit. Yeah.
Unit. One of them had lost his arm trying to rescue people. There's been an incredible price paid. Now, you had Donald Trump saying before inauguration that if the hostages weren't released, there would be hell to pay.
All hell to pay.
All hell to pay. Well, not all the hostages have been released, but they started before inauguration on purpose. I think Hamas was forced to take a deal. But as I read the reports on it, it looks like Trump forced a deal on Netanyahu and his government as well. It was great writing in The Guardian about how Steve Witkoff shows up in Jerusalem during Shabbat and says, I want to see the prime minister. And they say, oh, no, Mr. Netanyahu doesn't take meetings during Shabbat. You'll have to wait a few hours. And he ordered Netanyahu out and got the meeting and then told everyone what they were going to do and then flew to Doha and sat on everyone. So, allow me to use Catholic imagery here. Everyone had to put a lot of water into their wine, it seemed like, and that was forced by Trump.
I completely agree based on what I know and what I've heard. Absolutely.
So why are people still loving Trump and Witkoff? Like, my understanding is driving into along the highways a week or so ago, you would see big posters thanking Trump.
Big posters along the highways. Everybody, this country feels and knows that without the pressure from President Trump and when he was president-elect, and without the incredible job that Steve Witkoff has done since he was appointed Trump's envoy to just deal with this crisis, it's extraordinary. That would never have happened. I mean, Netanyahu's been sitting on this, in my view, and prioritizing coalition politics and maintaining his governing coalition intact over the return of the hostages. This deal, everyone knows, this is not news. Basically, the identical deal has been on the table since May. And it was not seen to fruition. And there is a very strong feeling here among not just the left wing or the centrists, but the right wing too, that it is the government that has stood in the way. Not
Hamas putting on extra conditions at the last minute, which is what we've often been told.
None of us have been in the room. Yes, we have been told that, and that's probably true. But, I don't think that the Netanyahu government was enthusiastic about making a hostage deal. I think they were enthusiastic publicly about, as we talked about earlier, destroying Hamas. They openly talked about establishing settlements in the Gaza Strip again. This was what they were moving towards, and it's been very open here. And one of the interesting things is that the Religious Zionist Party, which is led by Bezalel Smotrich, and he's a very important part of the governing coalition and also acts as Minister of Finance, he was driving this, we have to resettle, total victory, we can't give up, we can't let these terrorists out. Well, you know what? You asked me right at the beginning of this conversation, well, has public opinion shifted, or is all the opposition that prevailed before the release, has it changed? You damn straight it's changed. And people see those pictures and they see those young female soldiers reunited with their families. And we're starting to hear more and more the horrors of the captivity. 60%, this was a few days ago, it's probably higher now, 60% of Bezalel Smotrich's religious Zionist party voters support continuing with the deal on the terms and support continuing until every last hostage, living and dead, is brought home. So what that tells you is that even what are considered to be the hard right voters are seeing this very differently. When the hostages were released, and we've now had 3 releases over the last 2 weeks, and we have another one coming tomorrow, everyone thanks President Trump. Steve Witkoff, you should see them beaming, and
He dropped in on to see some of them when they were released the other day, right?
only one family has thanked Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I must say grudgingly. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not had a photo op with the families or the hostages. Witkoff could have, but instead, just like you just reminded me and raised, Witkoff is, I was one of these too. I was a diplomat who, came from the outside and drives them crazy because you actually do things and get things done. And that's what Witkoff is doing. So what does he do? Yesterday, we had 3 hostages released. I'm sure your listeners saw the horrific scenes from the Gaza Strip. Just chaotic, and an 80-year-old and a 29-year-old slip of a woman, a tiny little thing. They really were close to being lynched. And so Witkoff was all over the place yesterday. And I'm sure he was also on the phone burning up the lines to Qatar in the middle of this chaotic scene, saying, you guys better fix this or else. He also, yesterday, unannounced, popped into, there's a special family room in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, which is a very public gathering space that you visited.
Yep.
And
very moving.
There are a number, but there's one big sort of family room where they can just go as groups, families, and be on their own and not have anyone around them. And Witkoff just popped in. And it was on, the news I watched, I think, for 12 hours straight yesterday. I just could not stop. And he was just so incredible with families and down to earth and talking to them like he's just talking to his next door neighbor. And their gratitude and the force of their gratitude and their expressions of gratitude to Witkoff were just beyond moving. And, more than one said, this would not have happened without you. Witkoff, they say in Hebrew. Mr. Witkoff. Steve Witkoff has completely charmed this country, left to right, upside down. And so has Trump. These guys, and he also went to see the female hostages, the soldiers who were released and their families. And he's saying, we're going to get them all out. Like yesterday, he was talking about, yesterday was a complete sort of bonus. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it was because of some Hamas breaches last Saturday. So then we get these 3 additionals yesterday, and now there are actually 8, because 5 Thai hostages also came out, Thai workers. And then on Saturday, tomorrow, there will be 3 more. And Witkoff yesterday was saying, I don't know why we're waiting. Why don't we just get them all out, now?
Yeah.
This is how he's talking. And good question, Steve.
So there have been plenty of scenes of elation, but also some horrible stories told. And I remember one of the most heartbreaking things that I heard anyone tell me was in that young person's neighborhood of Kibbutz Kfar Assad. This woman was talking about how so remember, the women were taken October 7th. We were there January 2024. And this woman was saying, we have to get the female hostages out soon before it's too late. And she was meaning before they were pregnant. We've heard the stories of sexual abuse. That's got to be hitting people hard.
Yeah, so there's a lot that's hitting people hard. And that's one of the things. I have to say that the army and the government and the health ministry have done an extraordinary job of protecting the people returning. It's not just the women who have been sexually abused. There's been very violent sexual abuse of male captives as well. And they are not disclosing details. We know every once in a while, like over the last few days, there have been little bits that have kind of been shared with the public, but it's it's not attributed to a particular individual. Mm-hmm. So it's bad. We're hearing all kinds of things about the conditions in which they were kept and how they were treated. And, the world has chosen to focus on the fact that they came out wearing these ridiculous suits that Hamas, of course, said were IDF uniforms, which they were not, and that they looked healthy. Their hair was combed back, and they were up there on stage for the propaganda film, waving. And one of the returning female hostages, the soldiers, looked quite plump. She is plump. But we know that they feed them a lot in the weeks leading up. They get them ready. Now, we also know the condition that hostages who had not been fed and given additional nutrition and exposure to sunlight, we know how starved they were and how abused and how filthy. So there's a lot of show going on, a lot of smoke and mirrors. There are a lot of it is heartbreaking. The whole country is braced tomorrow we just learned a few hours ago, the return of 3 men. So there are no more surviving females, because the order was female civilians who are alive, then female soldiers who are alive, and now males who are alive. And 3 men are returning tomorrow. Keith Siegel, a 65-year-old American Israeli who's thought to be in poor health. His wife was with him until last November, and she's been campaigning for his release ever since. And another Erez Calderon, another kibbutz member, who's 53 years old, and Yarden Bibas. Now, the Bibas story is very well known. It's Shiri Bibas was maybe the wife of Yarden Bibas, early 30s couple from kibbutz Nir Oz, which was absolutely slaughtered, decimated by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Okay, not Hamas. Palestinian Islamic Jihad are worse. And Shiri was the one whose photograph became iconic, holding those 2 orange-haired babies. Mm-hmm. Her eldest son at the time was days away from his 4th birthday. Her youngest was 9 months old. It is believed that they died in an airstrike on October 27, 2023, so 3 weeks after their capture. But we don't know that for certain. Yarden was also taken captive. He was tortured in captivity in November 23. An Israeli who spoke Arabic translated for him under the glare of Hamas cameras. So they said, you're going to come in and translate and tell him. And he told him that his wife and 2 children had died in this strike.
That is the horror.
The horror. And he's coming home tomorrow. He's coming home alive. But
everyone kept holding out hope for baby Bibas. And I just thought there is no way that those animals have kept this baby alive.
No. But they kept him alive for 3 weeks. They took him. They took a 3-year-old, more than one, I think there were 2 or 3, without their parents. They took 3-year-old twin girls with their mom and their aunt, and then they just took one of the 3-year-olds for a few weeks. And her father's still in captivity. The savagery, the calculated cruelty. One of the women who came out yesterday, Arbel Yehud, beautiful slip of a woman who I mentioned from kibbutz Nir Oz, the ones that Palestinian Islamic Jihad took over. She's 29 now. She and her boyfriend, who is still in captivity, were taken. It's a family that's been ravaged, both their families. She was kept in total isolation all this time.
Wow.
She had no contact with anyone other than Pidge captors. God knows what that woman has been through. And they showed her right before they were released into this braying mob that wanted to lynch them, for the handover to the Red Cross. They showed her embracing 80-year-old Gadi Moses, who was from the same kibbutz, a bear of a man, if you see pictures of him before, and very, very frail now, very, very frail. A leading agronomist. He's lectures all over the world. He's incredible. And they see one another for the first time, and the embrace would just melt the polar ice cap. It was so moving. The 2 of them, Arbel, we think first, is taken through, surrounded by these thugs, these masked thugs, taken through this throng. And they particularly wanted to get Arbel. You know why? Because Israel refused to open up the corridor to allow people back into North Gaza until Arbel was released, because they had intelligence about the cruelty of her captivity and because of some lies and games that Hamas had played in the previous week's release. So the crowd's yelling. They want Arbel. They want her because you held back, 1 million people from going north for one Arbel. She became this symbol that they so hated. And this you will never see because Al Jazeera, the propaganda arm of the Qatari government, which had exclusive access and has been doing all the stage managing for these handovers, they lost control of what went on yesterday. 80-year-old Gadi Moses, who could not walk that far. And, the Israeli press is referring to it as the Via Dolorosa, which, as a Catholic will appeal to you. This gauntlet they were forced to pass. Gadi Moses, this bear of a man, very diminished, was being held up on both sides by Palestinian Islamic Jihad goons, and he fainted. They cut that out. He fainted. The stress. This man has survived almost 16 months of captivity in barbaric conditions, and this was what almost broke him. It's just unreal.
You said that embrace would melt the polar ice caps, but it obviously will not touch the hearts of those thugs. We need to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about those stage-managed handovers, why groups like the IRC and UNRWA need to go, and a little bit about what Donald Trump means when he talks about changing northern Gaza and clearing people out. Back in moments. One of the reasons that the International Red Cross was founded, why it exists, is to look after prisoners, and they did so admirably during the First World War, the Second World War, conflicts around the world, and yet they never visited the hostages taken on October 7th. And in fact, the first time the Red Cross saw these hostages was during a highly stage-managed handover run by the terrorist groups, either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as propaganda events. Vivian, how furious are people at the way that these hostages are being handed over? I mean, it makes it look like the crowds are huge. Now, if you get a wider shot, you see that everyone's jammed into a little spot. But you've got all the folks around the hostages being released with their weapons out and the green bandanas and trying to look really tough and a show of force. How is this being allowed to happen, that the handing over of hostages becomes a propaganda moment, complete with people filming from every angle to produce propaganda videos? How is that allowed to happen?
So first of all, I just have to comment about in World War II, because the Red Cross betrayed Jews during the Holocaust profoundly. And we know that there was at least one, maybe two, very staged visits to Theresienstadt, which was a way station concentration camp, primarily for German and Czech Jews on their way to Auschwitz. And the Nazis scrubbed up the camp and brought the Red Cross in World War II. And they said, this is great. It's a war, so maybe they're not living quite as comfortably as they're used to. But yeah, no problem here. And they knew. Everyone knew by that point. So Red Cross and Jewish people is a bit of a kind of...
It's a sore point.
It's a difficult history. With respect to the handover, there has been a lot of criticism of the Red Cross. I have lots of criticism for them, but I'm going to actually speak in their defense, surprisingly, in this case. The Red Cross is not negotiating these agreements. The agreements are negotiated by Qatar and Egypt as the kind of intermediaries, and they are negotiating with Hamas. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is not at the table. It's Hamas. And so Hamas is responsible with Qatar and Egypt for everything that transpires on the ground. Israel is in an unfortunate position now in which it has very little leverage in terms of demands. And even though it has made and agreed to certain conditions with respect to the release, they've been breached from the very beginning by Hamas. And so we can talk just a bit about how Israel has leveraged. With the support of the Trump administration, Israel would not have had that support from Biden. The Red Cross, many Israelis sort of demean it and say, oh, they're just operating like a taxi service, an Uber service. They go pick them up and they bring them out. They are in no position to dictate the terms. These are unarmed civilian humanitarian workers.
Fair enough, but they're allowing themselves to be
they're being used. But what are they going to do? Are they going to say to these thugs, no, we're not signing the certificate of release? And really, are we going to leave these girls there? Because
fair point. That's a fair point.
I wouldn't. I'm going to do whatever you want. They make the girls stand there and hold certificates with their souvenir bags of their time in Gaza. Should they refuse to do that so that, and not be let out? The Red Cross, fine, I say, go, sign the stupid certificates. It doesn't mean anything, and get them out. If anyone watched what happened yesterday, and the Red Cross is right in the middle of that surge in Khan Yunis, they're taking a lot of risk. And they deserve a lot of opprobrium for so much bad conduct throughout this crisis. But in terms of doing the job of getting in there, getting them in the cars and getting them safely out, I say thank you.
Now, my understanding is that the Trump administration did intervene. Witkoff did make demands and held back releasing the terrorist prisoners.
That happened yesterday. I mean, every time there has been an, quote, exchange, there has been some dramatic breach on the part of Hamas. And what happened yesterday in Khan Yunis at the handover was really dangerous and beyond chaotic, and Hamas is responsible for that. And what Israel did was said, we're not letting the busloads of terrorists leave the security prisons in Israel until Egypt and Qatar work the phones, get back to us and tell us this will not happen again. This is completely not on. And I'm sure that the phone lines were absolutely singed yesterday while we were watching the spectacle on TV. The Egyptians and Qataris reportedly did come back with assurances that Hamas understands they have to control things more effectively. And it's all staged, to make people freak out and to show the Arab world how strong Hamas is and how great Hamas is. And of course, your listeners may or may not be aware of the fact that the only media allowed in to the Gaza Strip to film this parody is Al Jazeera, which is the state-owned propaganda/media arm of the government of Qatar. And they're in there and they stage manage, they do the production. The production values are really good. They've got great equipment and you can see them.
Yeah. How many journalists that have been killed that had all kinds of access from October 7th on, we find out were actually members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad. The idea that Al Jazeera is some beacon of truth, some independent media, is beyond ridicule. Going forward, there's a couple of things to talk about with, at the end of this, what happens. Israel has taken the decision that they don't want UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for the Middle East, to be part of the solution or the future anymore. But they can't stop them from operating in Gaza. The whole world seems to believe that without UNRWA, Gaza would fall apart, and there would be chaos, as opposed to what's really happened. They've been there promoting the chaos, but they did kick. The Israeli government has kicked UNRWA out of Jerusalem. They've told them to vacate their offices and to get out of Israel. Is there a world where the Western donors of UNRWA, like Canada, wake up and say, you know what, this is a problem, and we've got to, not only stop funding UNRWA, but get reform at the UN?
Yes, and I think we're kind of, at the dawn of, I hope, that new world. The Trump administration has made clear in the 10 or 11 days since they've come into power that they will no longer be funding UNRWA. Now, the largest chunk of funding for UNRWA came from the U.S.
Now, in defense of Biden, they froze it. And my understanding is never released that funding again, unlike Canada, which announced a freeze between two large payments, meaning we never froze UNRWA's funding.
Well, actually, Canada did worse than that. Canada announced a freeze and did a rush advance payment of the second payment. And then they made the announcement we're freezing. That was Minister Ahmed Hussein. And so the payment wasn't due until late April, but he rushed it out the door in December or January, right before he made the announcement. It's never done. No one ever pays those fees or, support the financing in advance. It's just absurd. So, first of all, yes, the U.S. is not going to continue to fund UNRWA. Sweden, interestingly, recently announced that they are pulling all UNRWA funding. The Netherlands.
Hello, Noor was telling me Switzerland.
Switzerland, yep. So we have Sweden, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and we have we have an election coming up in Germany on February 23rd, and the likelihood is high that it is going to be a right-leaning government and that it's going to probably involve the AfD party in a coalition. And if that should transpire, I think it's highly likely that Germany will also pull UNRWA funding. Hungary, I don't know if they even fund right now. Czech Republic does. The dominoes are falling. UNRWA is not a humanitarian organization at all.
No, they're evil, and I've been documenting that for 15 years.
Exactly. So but Canada. I mean, look, if we have a Trudeau government and should Mark Carney prevail in an election, if they ever hold one, then I expect he would probably double Canada's support, or maybe triple it for UNRWA. And Canada is one of the largest funders right now. Way out of whack. We don't fund NATO, but we fund UNRWA like nobody's business. I think that I will safely conjecture, total speculation, that should Pierre Poilievre become the next Prime Minister of Canada, that UNRWA funding will be pulled.
Oh, it'll be gone. Believe me, it will be gone. I haven't spoken directly to Pierre about that, but knowing his thinking and knowing the thinking of those around him, these were the guys that pulled it when Stephen Harper was in power, which was the right thing to do.
And I was ambassador to Israel at that time, and I can tell you that both Prime Minister Harper and I took a lot of heat from some of the same parties, all kind of backroom stuff, and he stuck to his guns.
Donald Trump made some comments the other day about clearing out the Gaza Strip, and I'm not sure what he means by that exactly. And then he was asked again, and by the time this is posted, I mean, he may have had 5 more news conferences because he's doing about 2 a day recently. It seems like he's talking about moving people out of Gaza and into Egypt. And he was asked, well, will they even take them? I mean, anybody that has seen the giant wall between Egypt, I know there's tunnels underneath, I know there's all kinds of problems, but for the general population, Egypt built a really big, nasty wall that is, better defenses than anything Israel had, apparently. What do you think Trump is looking at doing here?
So it's really interesting. He's been making these comments for quite some time now, maybe more frequently and more kind of vociferously in recent days. I think that what he said a number of things consistently. One is that the population in the Gaza Strip is so intensely radicalized. It is it's like the Third Reich. It's like the German people during World War II, who had just been some brainwashed, some, of course, chose to believe it, but education, media, propaganda, everything just constantly drove home these themes relentlessly. And that's what has been happening in the Gaza Strip, aided and abetted, of course, by UNRWA and Western funding. And this is a population, and we know this from polls. I mean, people in the West love to say, oh, but the civilians, oh, but they're not all guilty. Well, you know what? It's a really radicalized population, overwhelmingly Islamist, which means they believe that the state of Israel is a cancer, a blight on the world, that it must be annihilated. Allah must prevail. All Jews are rightfully killed. I mean, they keep saying it, you know, their ceremonies and all their statements, even, you know, with the deal release, all the propaganda behind the hostages as they're being released is, we will liberate, you know, Al-Aqsa, we will liberate all of Palestine. I mean, they haven't given up the dream. So number one, Trump looks at that and he says, you know what? What are we going to do? Reconstitute this? That's insane.
Well, look, in our country, in Canada, and in other world capitals, we just keep hearing, well, we need a two-state solution. And my response is always, who's the other partner? Who's the partner? The guys that want to sit across and say, okay, we want to do October 7th again. Our opening position is Vivian and all Jews should be dead.
Exactly. And what people seem to have, you know, everyone in the West understood ISIS. They understood, like, wow, this is really bad. This is evil. This is extreme. They understood that with Al-Qaeda. For some reason, there's this desire to romanticize Hamas as resistance fighters, you know, as they're just seeking truth, beauty, and justice. No, they're not. This is a savage culture. And so I think Trump is saying, no, we're not repeating the same mistakes. This is insanity. Number one, this population has to be re-educated. Number two, as a practical matter, particularly in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, it's rubble. There is nothing left. We can get into how and why that happened. The fact is, there's rubble, there's no infrastructure, people cannot live there. So we're going to have to find a way for them to continue their lives elsewhere while the Gaza Strip is restored. But no one's going to restore it for Hamas to rule. So
no Marshall Plan for Hamas.
No, exactly. And one of the many impasses is, you know, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got the UAE kind of salivating over this prime coastline and really very good land. I mean, it's the same part of a small country that I now live in. It's very fertile. It's the breadbasket of Israel. But they've chosen to turn it into a bristling kind of munitions factory and war zone. It could have been Singapore. Both the UAE.
This is what I kept hearing when I was in Israel. Everyone saying this could be Singapore. This could be the next Dubai.
Yeah, it could.
On the Mediterranean.
It's unbelievably beautiful. So both UAE and Saudi want to come in and develop it, but they want to keep their powder dry and their hands clean. They don't want to get involved in, it's like, really, guys? No, sorry. So there's going to be some very heavy arm twisting by the Trump administration, I expect, because Trump is saying, you know what, Egypt? You've got to take some of these people in. Why do you expect Israel to continue to put up with this incredibly radical, hostile death cult on its border? This is just not sustainable. Well, guess what? Egypt doesn't want them. No Muslim country wants them. There are how many? 56 Muslim majority countries. And not one is stepping up to take them. You know who the 4 countries are who so far have kind of put their hands up for President Trump when he said we've got to resettle some of these people? Albania, Indonesia, Canada, and Egypt's getting its arm twisted very hard. Albania and Indonesia, there's money, and those are poorer countries, right?
Yeah. In Canada, we want to pretend we're taking them for the right reasons. We're not. It's politics on Justin Trudeau's part.
Yep, I really, really hope that Canadians start looking at what's going on and what we're bringing in and how they behave, and for the most part, don't assimilate, don't respect our national values. And
we've got the hate marches on the streets every week, multiple times a week here in Toronto, in Montreal, in Victoria. And that's without bringing in a completely radicalized population that, what's the numbers we said, 5,000 people. 99% of those 5,000 people will believe that October 7th was justified and should happen again. How do we assimilate in any way that kind of a population?
We don't. You cannot force assimilate. I think that all you have to do is look at much of Western Europe, countries that have the same liberal democratic values that Canada does or did, and what has happened in those countries. I mean, even in Germany, a country of 85 million people, Angela Merkel famously, decided, and I'm actually working my way through her autobiography, which is about as sizzling as she is, but I'm now at the 2015 point where she very much, quite impulsively, made the decision to let in over 1 million Muslim immigrants, asylum seekers. And this is in a country at the time of 84 million. And she now says that was a mistake. We now see what's going on in Germany. And that's one of the reasons that I'm traveling to Germany next week, is to really get a good handle on what we in Canada are looking at 5-10 years down the road, possibly sooner. Because people in Germany feel very threatened, and they are. Because most of these asylum seekers do not want to assimilate. They do not respect the values of the host country. They come in, they very much stick within their own community, and their values are to promote Islam. They don't make
we've got a conference that's been shut down twice and coming a third time to promote the caliphate.
Yep.
This is a group of people living in Canada who believe that there should be no Canada, that there should be no secular government, that the caliphate, led by a holy Islamic ruler, should govern everybody. I mean, that is insane, and a lot of people can't wrap their brains around that. We're going past time, but got to ask you one question about the future of government in Israel. The thing I heard time and again, left, right, and center, was, again, a year ago, everyone was angry at Netanyahu for failing to see October 7th coming, for failing to stop it. But left, right, and center, they all said, because, as Westerners were like, well, are you got to get rid of Netanyahu? And they were all, no, not yet. We need to deal with Hamas first. Has that changed? I've seen the polling. The parties that are currently part of his coalition would lose a lot of seats if there were an election. The other coalition would most likely have double the number of seats. What do you think is going to happen? What's the future of Netanyahu?
Well, the future of Netanyahu is at some point he's going to be gone. But, I know better than to try to predict Israeli politics. But I'll just lay out a few key facts. One is, yes, when October 7th happened, Israel rallied around the urgency of the moment, which is what this country does best. I personally did not agree. I thought at the time that there should be a change that the prime minister should resign. But the country did come together, and the expectation was that the war would be 3 months, 2 to 3 months, and we'd have it done. It didn't work out that way for a whole bunch of reasons. And there is today, if you fast forward 15, 16 months later, I would say quite widespread dissatisfaction and anger with respect to how this war has been prosecuted. We still have, hundreds of thousands of people displaced from their homes in the north and in the south. And it was very much, one very senior Army officer said to me recently, it was like we were like, it was whack-a-mole. There just seemed to be a lack of a strategic plan. For example, going into Shifa Hospital the first time, Israel had to go in 4 times. Why? Like, why do you go in, do the job, and then come out and then go back in? So there is now, I think, quite widespread dissatisfaction with the way in which the war has been prosecuted. This government is seen to have way overly politicized, important security decisions that have had to have been taken. And now we have ourselves in this hostage situation. And if I was to make a prediction, I would say this, that both Witkoff and Trump are going to lean on Netanyahu to get every last hostage out, even if it means a full IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, other than a kind of 1 kilometer wide, strip within the Strip along the border. And that will kill Netanyahu's coalition. There's no doubt. But I don't think he's going to have a choice. I don't think that the Americans will support Israel going back into Gaza without the repatriation of all hostages and bodies. And I frankly don't think most of this country will any longer. I think that there's a line that was crossed, and I think that back to some of the things we discussed earlier, the emotional kind of circuit that's just surging through this country upon seeing these hostages being released, I think has really helped a lot of people who oppose the deal to reconnect with what is our most fundamental and important value.
No one left behind.
No one left behind. And many of the people who opposed it, they said things like, look at them. Look at the streets of Gaza. They're celebrating. We look weak. That's why we shouldn't do this. And I look at them and I say, I'm not going to make my decisions based on what they see as being moral or powerful. We have to know what our own morality is. And, I think that that's really, really important. And I think people have reconnected with that. President Trump, before he was elected, everyone was saying, oh, he's anti-war. He's going back to this like huge isolationist, traditional kind of, depending on the era, American position. And I wasn't hearing that. What I was hearing him say was, I want the wars to end. Most of them are stupid and they can be solved pretty easily. But he was also saying, I will not shy away from using American power.
Yeah.
I will not shy away from using my levers to make those wars stop. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Middle East.
You and I heard the same thing. Vivian, it's always great talking to you. We could go on.
Thank you so much, Brian. I always love coming on.
Thanks for listening today. Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. You can subscribe to Full Comment, and please do subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. Help us out by leaving us a rating, a review, and telling your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.